Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. My name is Adam Oberhausen, and I'm your host. Joining me today is my co-host and AWS community builder, Tom Kowalski. Say hi, Tom.
Hello.
And I'm honored to introduce for the very first time our new co-host, Joe Coleman, professional wrestler and business technology consultant. Say hi, Joe.
Oh, hi, everybody. You're too kind, Adam. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the warm introduction there. I'm here to kind of help you guys with the show, keep things moving along, maybe crack some jokes along the way, and really help monitor the chat room. So, on that note, if anybody in the audience or listening, has any questions, just feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll make sure to bring them up and in the conversation. So, yeah, I think let's get it on.
Do it.
Thank you.
In this episode, we'll be diving back into the fascinating world of product management, and more specifically, defining good goals for your product by making data-driven decisions. We've got a lot to cover today, so grab your lunch and buckle up. Tom, how's it going, buddy?
It's going great. Excited to jump back into product management. We have our esteemed guests, subject matter experts that we had last time. Excited to jump back in where we left off and dive a little deeper into some of the topics, specifically around setting goals and measuring and monitoring. So yeah, again, we have Lauren Seaborg. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, great to be here. Lauren Seaborg. I'm a group product manager at Google.
And Nicole Anderson.
Hello, I'm Nicole Anderson. I'm a product manager, formerly software engineer. I've been in product for about 7 years, mostly focusing on B2B SaaS software.
And Calissa Pollard.
Hello, everyone. Yes, Calissa Pollard, senior product manager with OpenDoc. Adam also asked me to plug my podcast called What's Up Doc. We just take a look inside the warehousing world, logistics specific, and I've been with OpenDoc for 2.5 years now, and it was my first foray into product management. So it's been a fun ride.
Great. Well, let's get it started here. Lauren, you were the brainchild of this talk, so I wanted to kick it off with you and let's talk about how you define good goals. Maybe we lost Lauren, so let's.
Wait, am I back now?
Yeah, there she is.
All right, awesome. We were talking before this. We're like, we're live, so if we have little tech mishaps, we're going with it, right? So yeah,
I jinxed
about
it.
that.
Sorry, I jinxed it.
So thanks for letting me kick this off. I mentioned this in our first conversation where we focused on product management, and it just really highlight this as probably one of the most important aspects in my experience in product management of being able to be successful. And so I'm really excited to dive into this and spend some dedicated time talking about goals. You could talk about this for far more than a half hour. So, I think we'll really still only scratch the surface, but hopefully our listeners will walk away with some useful insights into what product managers are trying to accomplish and how important metrics and goal setting is in particular. So, yeah.
So where do we start with goals? Anyone? Is the goal set? We have a goal, and then
where does it come from?
Yeah, where does it come from?
Our bosses.
Exactly. I want to know that. Who is the man in the tower, woman in the tower that says this is the goal?
I mean, great starting question, right? I think that it comes from a few different places. You have some amount of top-down direction, right? Where your leadership says, this is what's important for our company, maybe for our particular product. And so you have to start from that fundamental place. What are we trying to accomplish? What's most important to the business for us right now? And then you, as a product manager, are mirroring that with your understanding of your users in your particular product and how you interpret that goal. So, just an example I can give that probably articulates this a little bit better. Let's say that my CEO is all about user growth right now. We are, maybe earlier on in our overall product life cycle, and we really want to get new user adoption. So that is the main thing that we want to drive. That's super important to be very clear about, because that is going to inform the sorts of things you do in a very drastic way. Overall, a product, the type of work that you do, and like the way that you manage a product when it's in like a growth mode, quote unquote, is very different than one that you're managing that is in, say, an optimization mode or a feature expansion mode. And so, you really want to understand at that high level, what is that goal? And then you take it in and say, well, what does growth mean for me? Is that new user acquisition? Is that tightening my funnel? Maybe I'm getting a lot of users in, but I'm churning them right away. Is that long-term growth? Maybe I get people in, they stick around for a week, and then they're out of here. So that's really where you start to zoom in and say, well, how am I doing right now? And where's my opportunity? And then how can I address those opportunities? That's the magic of where product managers come in. So you get some of it, some high-level direction, and then you're trying to carry that forward.
Is there some kind of I did some research for the show, as I do, and the SMART goals, is there some catchy acronym that you guys like to use when you're talking about goals? Or is it just come
Do you
from...
all call them goals, right? Or do you call them initiatives? What do you use in your Calissa?
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of companies nowadays use OKRs, and so I guess you could utilize SMART goals to kind of help you through what your OKRs should ultimately be. And
what does OKR stand for?
Objective key results. So you're creating an objective, and then you have a key result that you need to measure that objective based off of. So with a SMART goal, you really want to understand, has anybody ever heard of that SMART goal acronym before? Oh, okay.
I've heard of it. I've not used it personally, but
yeah, I haven't used it a ton either, but you kind of see it makes a lot of sense when you hear it. It's basically, it's a specific goal. It's attainable. It's relevant. It's time bound. Those are,
Skip the M. Which is
measurable. Measurable. Yep. Thank you. Yep. Specific,
so
measurable,
specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I've been around the block a few times, and I've never seen a business have this is our SMART goal session. So it's who does do you as product managers, are you accountable for the goal? Because a lot these goals seem like they're more like business, high level business objectives, but is the product manager accountable for those high level goals? Calissa?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times when you're creating your goals, you are working very closely with what, in my experience, it's with what the clients are needing, and it's also with what my corporation is asking for as well.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think that, like I said, maybe it depends on the granularity of your ownership as a product manager. What's your particular scope and what do you have control over? So if an overall business goal might be to grow revenue, maybe I can only own a piece of that. So I'm not necessarily accountable to the top line business goal of increasing revenue to some degree. But what's the part of that I am responsible for and I do have control over in my scope as a product manager? So if I have an imaginary product that, say, is helping users make online reservations for restaurants. And so, we know that we get some amount of revenue share based on number of completed bookings. Well, I can specifically say that we want to increase the amount of bookings or rate of booking completion, something like that, because that's how we will contribute to revenue. And I would be totally accountable for setting that overall objective, that it's important for us to be focused on increasing revenue in this particular scope. And then I'd be responsible for trying to define a roadmap that leads to that result, and ultimately accountable for how much we're able to contribute to the top line goal for the business. So it's kind of this intermediary that you're really trying to be accountable for.
Okay. I had a question for Nicole. I think since you came from you've worked in smaller companies, so like can you compare like how a company like Google has a goal versus a smaller company you may have worked for, and like, is it more top down driven? Is it more sales driven? Or is it just like, can a feature be a goal? I don't know. Just let me hear you riff on
Yeah.
your experience with goals.
I've kind of experienced it from all of those angles that you described. I think as DaySmart grew, we were getting closer to more of what Lauren was describing, where there were key goals that the company had set out for that year. Like, for example, increasing the percentage of customers that were using our integrated card processing was really important for our CEO. So then that was something that was like, clearly attainable through projects that I could control as product owner of the product that had the onboarding process for that, which was not very well executed. So that was something that I took on. That was a project where we could convert more people to use our card processing by making the process easier, fewer steps, less friction. So that was an example of where I was given a directive and I was able to define my own goals from that. But there's also a lot of times where it's kind of more vague of, we just want feature parity with competitors or with legacy products. And we were not as good at defining measurable goals, which as I got more and more into it, realizing how important that was, because you may not know at the end if you were successful, and because you don't even know what you were really trying to achieve with that goal. Mm-hmm. Another thing I really struggle with, and I was starting to make some progress with implementing a data lake and a Tableau system towards the end of my tenure at DaySmart, but sometimes just having access to data to know what goals to create for yourself is difficult in a small company, because you may not really have the visibility to know what are the metrics that I want to measure. How do I measure them? What do we all have the same definition of what those metrics are across departments? Like, if I say churn, does the VP of sales mean the same thing when they talk about churn, or when they talk about MRR and ARR? How are they measuring that? And is it the same as how I'm measuring it? Certain pockets of the company would have information that others didn't. So it became really difficult to even get on the same page talking about the data that we're trying to measure. So yeah, that can be a challenge for at least for me it was.
Yeah, that's a great transition to the next step in our conversation, which is the importance of data in product management. So Nicole, you highlighted some of the struggles that we had at DaySmart with data. I'd like to hear how, Calissa and the OpenDoc team, like, how's your data and how do you make sense of it, and how do you use it to make the decisions?
Yeah, and I think, you want to use data, but you also do want to get that client feedback. So quantitative and qualitative data is very important. So just looking at the numbers doesn't always paint the entire picture. So a big thing is customer feedback. So you can do surveys and things like that. And then you can also look at user behavior data. So you can look at Google Analytics. We also have something called Mixpanel, which, will track the user's clicks, or Hotjar, which is like a heat map. It'll show you how often they're running their cursor over certain buttons, or if they get frustrated and they press a button a bunch of times, it'll, have like a sad or angry face. So you can quickly just get to that point and see, okay, why are they getting frustrated here? And then you can also find more information about sales data. We track a lot of the information about what our salespeople are pitching and which opportunities are actually close winning or close losing. And if it's a close loss and it's due to a product feature, they'll start to track that. And we can, over time, start to see, okay, if we did have that feature, how much more revenue could we have, made in the last year, or however, whatever your time box is.
So you talked a little bit about user feedback and then the actual like the data, looking at data. Do you weigh one more heavily in your experience? Like, do you think the user feedback weighs more than what some data tells me, or do you have to treat them both as equals?
Yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand. Sometimes you'll look at the data, you'll look at the graphs, and you'll just want to know what is going on, and so you'll go ask questions to clients. And obviously, you don't want to just take one client's word for it. You're usually asking multiple clients over the course of however many weeks or months, depending on what the project is. I think they pretty much go hand in hand. I think it's very important to have that conversation with the users.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you have to use your intuition on that, and you don't let one override the other in any, like, sometimes you'll look at the data and you'll have like a gut feeling that something doesn't make sense, and you'll have to dig into maybe there was a mistake in the report or it wasn't generated in the way that you thought it was, and you don't necessarily want to act on that. And then, the other way could be true as well, that your intuition could be wrong, and you have to listen to the data. So it's kind of a balance, I would say.
Okay. Lauren, can you maybe help us understand how to draw meaningful conclusions from data and how you like identify the trends and patterns in the data, and like without putting your own bias into the data? That's always, yeah, I'm just kind of rambling, but just like how do you guys use data to draw meaningful conclusions is the essence of my question.
It's a great question. I'm going to start a half a step before your question, and just continue a little bit from the conversation we were just having, and then get there. So one of the things that I have learned a lot about while I've been at Google is when is the right time to use different types of data to make different types of decisions. And so I think Nicole and Klitz were both touching on this, where sometimes you have user engagement data, sometimes it might be attitudinal feedback from a survey, sometimes it's qualitative from interviews that you do with users, sometimes it's support feedback. You have all sorts of different ways in which you get different types of information. And this just goes to connect back to the start of our conversation. This goes back to having that clear understanding of your goals to then say, well, what sources of data are the most important for you to be looking at? If I have a top line goal of revenue growth, then I have very clear data that I can tie that back to. What are the things that drive revenue up, what users' behaviors then are correlated with revenue? And I can look back at that. And it tends to be a very quantitatively driven and engagement driven sort of metric that you're looking at and analyzing. If you are trying to maybe find a good product market fit, and you want to understand user sentiment, satisfaction, a feeling of completion for a problem that you're trying to help them solve, those are your, classic survey pieces of data, right? You're not going to get that just off of user behaviors. You might then look at what types of behaviors do users take, and how does that tend to correspond to what they'll tell me in a survey. But you can't understand how a user feels more satisfied with their product experience based on attitude or based on engagement metrics. So if you're going to be analyzing and making decisions off of these, you have to start with, well, what was the question I'm asking, and what's therefore the right data source to look through? And then as you do that, what are you looking for? I kind of started mentioning a few of these, but if I'm looking at data, I'm trying to understand trends first and foremost. I'm trying to say I have a very clear understanding of what I'm hoping to see, what maybe good looks like, a successful session, a successful transaction, things like that. You kind of know, what's an average time to complete a task, how many users might be doing that versus how many users might not. And so you're just looking for these like high level trends. And then you're looking for things that are going to indicate an opportunity. Maybe 70% of your users you see like dropping off of some flow at a similar point in the experience. Like you dive into that. So that's the first thing, is just like objectively really understanding where you need to dive in based on the goals that you set, based on the right type of data set. Identify trends, identify outliers, and that starts to get you into, all right, what's causing those things, and what does that imply in terms of where we could be spending our time making product improvements.
Yeah. How do you all balance these goals with everything else? Right? How do you keep track of it, right? Maintaining the application of the product, right? The performance, the reliability, security. How do you find that balance with the goals that you have versus everything else?
I'm sure it's different for everybody, depending on the software you're building, the company size. What I tried to do, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully, was to have goals or projects for all of the Scrum teams separated out, because I was able to plan the roadmap for 3 to 5 Scrum teams at once. So if I knew that there were some really important goals that we needed to accomplish for a quarter, I would basically have that be the main focus for one team, and don't let them get interrupted with injections or fires, bug fixing, all of that. And then I might have another team that's more focused on projects that are in flux and we don't necessarily know are going to come up in a month. So they're able to kind of take the injections and the, things from support that are on fire, but then that wouldn't necessarily hold up the timing of the other team. It doesn't always work perfectly, because sometimes there's just not enough teams to offset everything. But that's one way that I try to segment the work. I always thought of it as like a game of Tetris, and I was always trying to like fit everything in where I could, but sometimes it doesn't always work out so perfectly.
Random pieces come, right? You didn't
Yes.
anticipate, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tom. I think sometimes I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So a lot of times we will work to just have like actual goals that are achievable. That's a really big one, and pushing back if we really think that it's not necessarily achievable within the time that we're allotted. So it's very important to work very closely with your executives, with your managers, even with the customer's expectations, all of that, and making sure that they understand where you're at. A big piece for us is having a roadmap, your roadmap changes all the time, so that's okay, but always kind of putting in some buffer time for helping with support tickets, or if you do find a regression or a bug and, your team kind of has to halt and fix that problem before they can move on and start implementing any additional features or anything. So it is definitely a balancing act, but I would say my advice is usually under promise and over deliver, and that's done pretty well for my position here. So.
Are there any tools that you use to help you kind of see what's, stack up and what's more the higher priority, right? Like assigning certain security things a higher score, right? And like being able to see it.
So our team heavily works in Jira. That's our tool of choice. There's a ton of other tools. We used to use ClickUp was another one, really good one. And you could plan your sprints out. You could plan, your quarter out a little bit further. We kind of do like the now, next, later, time boxing and making sure that we're tracking things that we need to get done now versus later. And then we just recently implemented another tool called Product Board. And this is a place where we send our clients to go input feedback or, feature requests. And we start to track all of that data. And then we could map that towards a specific ticket or a specific feature. And then we can start to map a full roadmap using that tool, which has been really helpful for us, but just recently implemented. So, yeah. I don't know about Nicole or Lauren, what you guys use on your teams.
I have probably the least sophisticated answer to this. We have a lot of spreadsheets here at Google. It's sort of like a skeleton in the closet. It's a long story, but yeah, we have a lot of spreadsheets. We also have a lot of internal tools that we use, but often just magical spreadsheets. It's the easiest way to stack it all up.
And it's Google Sheets, right? So you can.
And it's Google Sheets specifically,
good.
of course.
Yeah. You can't use anything not Google is taboo.
No, you cannot. But I just want to really totally agree with everything Nicole and Calissa said. I mean, two things that are really essential for me in kind of making those trade-off decisions is one, kind of like bucketing how much of the team's focus is on different areas. So if we do set a few goals for the team, then you're kind of saying, well, 40% of the team is focused on that goal, 30% of the team is focused on that goal. And we don't ever try to subscribe to 100%. We always try to subscribe to about 80%. So you have that wiggle room. So you have people's time that you hopefully should be able to flex. And then we try to take that also within those spaces, have a really clear prioritization with that roadmap and say, okay, well, what are the absolute top priorities and what are the things we're willing to trade off? Where do we draw that line? So if stuff comes up, we can do that. But I've found no excellent way to prioritize across very different things. I cannot say, doing this security project is more or less important than doing like this revenue generating project. Like, how do you compare those things? So just trying to say they each have their space. They're both really important. We have people dedicated to each. And then within that, you've created yourself a framework to then be pretty aggressive with your prioritization, to look at things as they come and reevaluate. And one of a product manager's most important tools is their ability to say no with information back to decisions as things come up.
I've struggled with the percent allocation. Like, we always did the same thing of, every sprint we're going to do 20% on bug fixes or tech debt or some allocation. And inevitably there's some project deadline that we're running towards, and, we have, we're getting pressure or whatever, and that's going to be the first thing to get cut is the stuff that the, leadership doesn't see directly. So that was kind of where I started to have different teams, like to separate it out where like they're more insulated. But then when they find out you have a team, then they're going to give you more projects too. So sometimes that doesn't always work, but I definitely agree. Like, if you are able to stick to the under promise, over deliver, and stick to the percent allocation, like that is the absolute best way to do it. I just always struggled with when I try to under promise, they're like, why is it taking so long? Or like, that doesn't seem accurate. That shouldn't take you that long. But it's like, I know, but if it's not that long, then you're going to be happy. But but I mean, I agree. That would be like that's always the ideal to work towards. So
yeah.
Pro tip, sandbag your estimates.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking.
It's just that it sometimes doesn't, like, they'll
you have to be reasonable. You have to be reasonable and be able to back up your argument, right? You can't just come at them with a random number and make it look like you're just trying to sandbag all the time, or else you lose trust, right? But you can say, hey, I really don't know how to exactly give you the exact timeline here. All I know is that we could definitely get it to you by this time. We could potentially get it to you earlier, as long as nothing else happens in the world. So, all kinds of things happen. It's, hard to predict.
So I want to talk a little bit about some pitfalls that you do making with data. Like, is it up to you guys to interpret the data, or do you guys have like a team of data scientists and economists that are working with you to help you make these decisions? Because I'm just thinking, like, we're all human, we all have biases. You feel that the product needs to go in one direction, but maybe the data tells you something else. So like, how do you avoid the pitfalls of the data-driven stuff and not include your biases when looking at the data?
I'll weigh in a little bit on this first.
Riff on it, Lauren.
I recognize that I'm probably, like, I work for this very big company, so I think that my experience is not necessarily typical. But that said, thankfully, I do have a team of analysts that are very familiar with how to statistically analyze data in an appropriate way, in a very disciplined way. I know enough to be dangerous, so I can take a fairly straightforward analysis question, look at some existing kind of packaged tools that we have that help me to easily answer some of those straightforward questions. But I have no business diving in and really trying to do like correlation analysis and all sorts of more complex things. So I do have a dedicated team that does that. I also have like specific quantitative UX researchers and qualitative UX researchers who do survey analysis and interview analysis. So I just get to like synthesize all this information as a product manager, which is fabulous because I am not, necessarily a statistical expert. And then, I think like the questions of bias are really important regardless, because you can make data tell any story you want it to. That is really important to recognize that inherent flaw. Even if you are absolutely as diligent as possible, you can cut a graph in a very specific place, and just say like, wow, if I look at this specific date range, it tells this story, like you can selectively use data. Don't do that. That's not good for anybody. So I think a product manager has a huge responsibility to really look at the holistic picture, to really check their bias, to understand their bias and check their bias, to have that comfort with recognizing when their hypotheses didn't prove out, and saying like, oh, I didn't expect that result, but the data clearly shows this. So what do we do about that? So it takes like that hyper awareness and diligence, and then ultimately sometimes humility.
That sounds pretty incredible. Your team of analysts and
no kidding.
I love them.
And,
they're my heroes.
Probably your secret AI machine that you have access to. Anyways, I'd love to hear kind of the other end of the spectrum from Calissa and Nicole about working in smaller orgs where you might not have a team of data scientists and business analysts to help you make the data-driven decisions. So what's your guys' take on that?
Go for it. No, go ahead. It's okay.
Sorry, I touched on it earlier, but I was trying to build dashboards for product and engineering to use towards the end when I was at DaySmart. Basically, like they had built a data lake, ingesting a bunch of information from our CRM and other sources, and I was trying to build dashboards that we could use to create these SMART goals, like you described, that could we actually measure if we did what we said we were going to do. So I was kind of the guinea pig for that project, responsible for writing the queries to gather the data and build it. And it's tough because we don't really have, at that size company, we didn't really have anyone dedicated to that job. So there's really no one person to pick up the slack.
Order. That's like a near impossible task. Like you're not a data scientist. Like it's just, Calissa, how about you? I want to respect everyone's time and get the show off here. But yeah, I'd like to hear how you guys do it with OpenDoc.
Yeah, so it's definitely more of a pull method instead of a push method. So a lot of times we have a question and then we'll go to our data lakes or whatever data resources that we have and try to find information about answering that question. Sometimes you could have insufficient data, or you were relying too heavily on just one single source of data. So for us, we really do go back out there and ask those questions to the clients and, validate the findings that we came to our conclusions with. So I think it's important to still kind of talk to those clients after you've pulled the data.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop for this week. Really appreciate our guests joining us again. You guys are great. Appreciate you coming on the show. I want to thank all our listeners for listening to the show today. We hope you find the conversation informative and valuable. If you have any questions or feedback, just hop on our Discord and shoot us a question or let us know what you want us to talk about next. But other than that, lunch is over, so get back to work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.